My father and stepsister plan to kill me. I found out my stepsister and stepfather are planning to kill me. This is not a joke. They want my inheritance, and they said they're going to off me. I caught it with their text messages. Here's what happened. All right, let's dive into the backstory. I'm a 26-year-old dude, and a few years ago I was living the independent life away from any family drama. But to really start this story, you need to rewind to when my dad passed away. That hit us hard, really hard. My mom, she's the gentle type, and his death really took a toll on her. Fast forward a bit, and she's married to a guy named Bob. No, Bob, he's got a daughter, Sarah, from his first marriage. It never warmed up to Bob. Something about him just seemed off from the get-go. Maybe it was how quickly he moved in or the way he hovered whenever my mom talked about finances. Sarah, she was another story, same age as me, but lazy as she flunked out of college and just glued herself to my mom's couch, living off her money. He moved out because I couldn't bear to watch what felt like a slow-motion disaster. Living on my own was like a breath of fresh air. I landed a decent job, got my own place, and life was looking up the end. Last year, I got a call from my mom's doctor. Her health was on the decline, some complex heart condition that I can barely pronounce. My mom needed more help. And I got this gut feeling that Bob and Sarah being alone with her during this time wasn't right. Driven by that feeling, I decided to move back into my mom's place. Breaking this news to Jenna, my girlfriend, was tough. We had plans, moving in together, maybe even adopting a dog. But Jenna, thank God for Jenna, she's always had this way of understanding things better than most. The day I moved back, everything looked the same but felt completely different. Bob was all charm, laying it thick with Buddy and Son. Every chance he got, Sarah barely acknowledged me, just a nod here, and they're like the world owed her something. I settled back into my old room, surprisingly untouched, except for a bit of dust. Seems like Bob wasn't big on cleaning unless it involved cleaning out my mom's bank account. I laid low the first few days, just watching their routines. Sarah was a permanent fixture in front of the TV controller and hand only moving to Eater's Leap. Bob was out a lot hitting the golf course or brew. Ench with Buddy, she never mentioned before seeing my mom's a fragile man. It was tough, wet. Talked a lot about the old days, about Dad. I steered clear of bringing up Bob or Sarah because every time I did, she'd just sigh and switched pics. Their spending habits were another red flag. Bob sported new golf clubs almost weekly, and Sarah's tech gadgets were always the latest model. They weren't exactly discreet about enjoying the perks of my mom's pension. I started monitoring the finances more closely, just to make sure my mom wasn't being completely taken for a ride. A couple of ex in here to nurse. Bob's choice of caregiver was about as useful as a chocolate. Fire guards. They found Nora someone with solid credentials who came highly recommended. Bob didn't like that, gave me an earful about how unnecessary it was, but I didn't budge. My mom needed real care, and I was going to make sure she got it. Balancing work and home life turned into a juggling act, but my boss was flexible. Nora was a lifesaver, keeping me updated on my mom's health and managing her meds professionally. I'd eased my mind with having her around the nun night. I decided it was time to set up a camera in my room. Not that I'm paranoid, but trust was in short supply. It was just a small security camera hidden away on a shelf. I figured it was more for my peace of mind than anything else. Boy, was I wrong. Little things started to seem out of place. MV document hair shifted folder. They're nothing huge, but enough to raise questions. Then checking the camera footage one evening, I caught them, Bob and Sarah, sneaking into my room, searching through my stuff. They looked particularly interested in paperwork, likely about the will or power of attorney. My mom had mentioned wanting to make sure I was taken care of, and it seemed Bob and Sarah had gotten wind of that and were not pleased. I kept the camera rolling, collecting more evidence every day. They were plotting all right, but exactly what I wasn't sure yet all I knew was that I had to protect my mom and myself. I wasn't about to let them win under my watch. So I've been back home for about a month now, and let me tell you, it feels like walking eggshells. Every day something new pops up that just doesn't sit right with me. Bob and Sarah, they've got this routine down. Path's out playing golf or meeting up with his so-called buddies, and she's usually locked in her room or shopping online with mom's credit card like it's going out a F-style. One morning, I was making coffee when I overheard Bob on the phone in the next room. He was speaking in hushed tones, which is unusual for him because he's typically loud enough that you can hear him without venturing. I couldn't catch the whole conversation, but it was something about property and money. Red flags went up all over the place. Later that day, when I was supposed to be at work, I stayed back claiming I had ATLA conference. I wanted to see what they do when they thought I wasn't around. Sarah slinked out of her room with this smug look on her face, and Jay joined Bob in the living room. They didn't notice me peeking from the hallway, started talking about securing their future and how they needed to handle the situation. I couldn't believe it. They were plotting right there in the open. I knew you needed to keep a closer eye on them, so I set up a couple more cameras in the common area, one in the living room and another in the dining area. I'm no tech wizard, but Jenna helped me get them set up over the weekend. She was worried sick, but she knew as well as I did that we needed evidence. If we were going to protect Mom, things got weirder. The following week, Mom had a good day. You know, one of those when she's almost her old self. We spent some time in the garden, and she talked about Dad and the trips they used to take. Isa Bob watching us from the window, and he didn't look pleased. It's like he hated seeing her happy or something that night. I reviewed the new camera footage and saw Ben entering Mom's office, a place he usually had no business being. He was riffling through her papers, probably looking for financial documents or the will. I decided it was time to confront Mom about the situation. It was a tough conversation, man. I didn't want to stress her out, but she needed to know. It told her about and Sarah about the cameras, and what I suspected. Mom was quiet for a long time. Then she just nodded and said she'd been feeling uneasy too, but was too afraid to say anything. She asked me to handle it to make sure everything was okay. It broke my heart to see her like this, trusting to fix a mess in her own house the next day. It took a day off and followed Bob. I know sounds like some spy movie stuff, but I had to know what he was up to. He met up with a couple of shady-looking characters at a golf club. I couldn't get close enough to hear, but it took some photos. It looked serious. When I got back home, I checked Sarah's room while she was out, found receipts for stuff she bought with Mom's money, expensive stuff, way beyond normal. That evening, it tried to get more info out of Bob casually, just some small talk. He brushed me off, said he was busy and had things to take care of. Sarah was watching TV, smirking like she knew something. I didn't. It was infuriating. A few days later, things came to a head. I got a call from the bank. There had been some large transactions from Mom's account, transactions neither Mom nor I had authorized. I confronted Bob with the evidence. He tried to brush it off, saying he was managing her finances, and it was all under control. But Isa right through him. It told him I had set up a meeting with the bank and our lawyer to go over everything. Bob's face went white. He tried to argue, but I was firm, told him this wasn't up for discussion. Sarah heard the commotion and came down, asking what was going on. I told her. She flipped out, saying I had no right to interfere, but I stood my ground. Mom watched all this from the doorway, and I could tell she was scared, but also relieved that someone was finally standing up to them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Jenna called and we talked for hours. She kept saying I was doing what was necessary, protecting Mom, when she couldn't protect herself. It helped hearing that the next day Sarah tried to sweet-talk Mom, probably trying to sway her before the meeting. I watched them from the kitchen, ready to step in if Sarah crossed the line. Bob avoided meal together, which was fine. By meso here where the meeting with the bank and the lawyer is tomorrow. I'm nervous. Man, it feels like everything's coming toe ahead, and I don't know what's going to come out of it. But I do know one thing. I'm not backing down, not when Mom's safety and well-being are on the line. I'll fight the leeches with everything I've got. Stick around, folks. Chapter 3 is going to be a doozy. I can feel it all. Right, where did I leave off? Yes, the big meeting with the bank and our lawyer, man. I was gearing up for it like it was the final boss in a video game or something. Couldn't sleep much the night before, kept running through all the scenarios in my head. Morning came and it was I had all the paperwork line. DuPaul, the unauthorized transaction reports printed out, and the camera footage on a USB stick. Felt like a detective or something gathering all this evidence. Mom was nervous. You could see it. She kept fidgeting with her hands, and every time the phone rang, she'd jump a little. Bob was unusually quiet, which was our relief because his constant blabbering about nothing usually grated on my nerves. Sarah, on the other hand, was a mesh. She was trying to play it cool, but her pacing back and forth in the living room told another story. We headed to the bank first. The meeting was set up in one of those sterile conference rooms that always feel a bit cold. Our bank manager, Mrs. Thompson, was there along with a couple of other suits I hadn't seen before. They all had that serious, no-nonsense look on their faces. I laid out everything, showed them the transactions, the dates, the amounts, and how none of them matched up with Mom's usual spending pattern. Mrs. Thompson listened, nodding along, asking a few pointed questions. And their mom confirmed she hadn't authorized any of those expenses, her voice barely above a whisper. I could tell she was embarrassed, like she felt she was causing trouble, but this was her money, her life. Bob tried to interrupt a few times, spinning some story about how we was just trying to help manage finances better, investing in this and that, but Misa Thompson wasn't having it. To shut Bob down, Ready Quick said they'd be conducting a full audit of Mom's accounts and that any discrepancies would be reported. Next up was the lawyer's office, which was even more intimidating. If you can believe it, our family lawyer, Mr. Daniels, had been with us since Dad's time. He's this grizzled old guy who looks like he's seen it all and probably has reviewed the documents. I brought this brows furrowing deeper with every page. When we showed him the camera footage, his reaction was something else. He paused the video, pinched the bridge of his nose, and sighed, "This is serious." He said, looking up at Mom, we might be looking at charges of financial abuse and fraud. Mom just nodded, tears in her eyes. She knew this was serious, but hearing it out loud by someone like Mr. Daniels made it all too real. We discussed our next steps. Mr. Daniels suggested we change all of Mom's account passwords and security settings. He also recommended setting up a new will that would be airtight against any more of Bob and Sarah's shenanigans. He mentioned getting our restraining order if things escalated, which seemed like a real possibility given how Bob and Sarah had been acting leaving the lawyer's office. It felt a mix of relief and dread. We were doing the right things, but it was clear this was just the beginning. Bob was silent on the ride home, stewing. Sarah kept trying to text someone, probably looking for a way out of the mess she'd helped make back home. Things gotten surreal fast. Bob packed up some of his things, left saying he needed some time to think things over. Sarah locked herself in her room. Mom and I ate in the kitchen, not really talking, just sitting together, trying to process everything that night. As I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about all we discovered and how far Bob and Sarah might still go. I got up and checked the locks on all the doors and windows, double-checked the new security settings I'd installed on Mom's accounts. I didn't know what Bob might try next, but I wasn't taking any chances. The next morning was quiet, too quiet. Sarah was gone. Turns out she'd packed a bag in the night and left, not a goodbye, just gone. Mom was upset, of course, but there was also a sense of relief in here, like she could finally breathe again without Sarah's dark cloud hanging over the house. Was spent day reviewing everything with Miss Daniels over the phone, making sure every legal I was dotted and to crossed. He was going to push on with the financial abuse investigation and had advised us to be vigilant, keep dominating everything. So here, I am writing this down because I don't want to forget any details. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I'm here, I'm watching, and I'm ready to protect my mom from whatever Bob and Sarah might still throw our way. Stick around. Guys, this story is far from over, and I've got a feeling there are still a few twists left in it. I'm just hoping we can find some peace at the end of this crazy ride. All right, buckle up, folks, because things went from 100 real fast after Sarah bolted. The house was eerily quiet without Heron, and Bob's constant schemming filling the air. Mom I were trying to get back to some kind of normal, enjoying the peace. But I guess that was too much to ask. For a couple of days after Sarah left, Bob came back, hadn't even knocked, just used his key like nothing happened. Found him in the kitchen making coffee like it was just another Tuesday. I was in the living room, and let me tell you, my heart started racing when I's a whim had know what his game plan was. Now need to talk. He's a ID, plain and simple. I wasn't about to let them dictate anything, but I figured I'd hear him out. Maybe he was ready to cut his losses and move on. Mom came down when she heard his voice, and I saw her brace herself against the doorframe. She looked scared, but there was also this steely kind of resolve in here. Yais no more. I guess Bob had this whole sob story ready, started talking about how he'd made some bad decisions, but only ever wanted to help, and how I missed my dad. Man, it was like watching someone flip a switch, fake tears and all, but Mom and I weren't buying what he a selling note anymore. I asked him straight up what at about the money. Bobbin sneaking around looking for the will. He tried to brush it off, said he was just trying to be proactive about finances, that he thought that was doing the right thing, but I cut him off, showed him the printouts of the bank statements again. And this time I had the transaction times and locations proof that he was laying it got thieved. Bob's facade started to crack, and his real agenda came out. Admitted he'd been trying to secure his and Sarah's future because he was worried about being left with nothing. Now when Mom passed the gal of this guy talking about Mom like she was just a stepping stone to his comfort, Mom lost. He told him she'd been too blind, too trusting, because he'd been her connection to my dad, her late husband, someone she loved dearly. Hearing that broke my heart. Guy, she was so vulnerable. And this jerk exploited that. Wheeled Bob. It was time to leave for good. This time his response, he actually threatened to sue us for emotional distress and loss of residency. Can you believe that? Luckily we had Missa Daniels and speed dial a quick call, put that nonsense to be dem. R. Daniels reminded Bob about the ongoing investigation and suggested here consider his position unless he wanted to add go feast to his troubles. Bob left, but not quietly, knocked a chair over on his way. Out slammed the door so hard, a picture fell off the wall. Momand. I just stood there in the aftermath, kind of shell-shocked. Wes spent the rest of the day going through every document, every account, making sure Bob hadn't left use any more surprises that night. We talked a lot about what we'd done. Next, it was clear we needed a fresh start, some new boundaries we decided to change. Ethelocks update all security systems and Evento kid about selling the house and moving somewhere smaller. Just the two of yous. It felt good. Making plans, taking control back. But then, as if we hadn't had enough excitement, Sarah showed up the next morning alone. No luggage, looking a mess. She come to apologize. She said turns out life on her own wasn't as glamorous as she thought it would be. She was broke. Her friend had ditched her, and here she was crawling back. Mom's a softie. Always has been. She listened to. Sarah offered her a seat and coffee. But I was where he had to be. Right, we sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where we'd had countless family breakfasts, and listened to Sarah spill her guts. She talked about feeling overshadowed by Baba, about feeling pushed to do things she knew were wrong. It was a lot to take, and we decided to give her a chance on a trial basis. Strict rules, limited access to finances, and mandatory family counseling. Sarah agreed. See me relieved. Devengesh shitting rock bottom can change your perspectives. So now we're trying to navigate this new dynamic. It's awkward, tensey times, but also kind of hopeful. Mom's doing better, smiling more, and I'm keeping my guard up, making sure Sarah sticks to the plan. It's a day-by-day thing, but we're getting there. Things had been somewhat athome after Bob's last visit, the one where he dropped off those bewildering documents we had just begun to piece together, a semblance of normalcy, when Sarah asked for a family meeting one evening after dinner tea. Heatmosphere was immediately tense. Her serious tone and uneasy glances suggested that this wasn't just about any household matter. We all settled in the living room, the air thick with anticipation. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands nervously fidgeting in her lap. I've been doing a lot of thinking. She started avoiding eye contact, and there's something I need to tell you all. It's about that about Bob. Moment I exchanged a worried look. We had been through so much already. The thought of more hidden secrets was exhausting. Sarah continued, her voice is shaky. Dad, he had plans that involved me. He wanted me to help him get rid of you. She said, here Yai's meeting mind filled with remorse. Had thought if I were out of the picture, somehow we could manipulate Mom into changing her while leaving everything to him. The room went silent. It was one thing to suspect Bobo financial deceit and manipulation, but a hearth that he'd stooped solo us to consider something as she, a charming meta gain access to Mom's wealth, was chilling. Mom's face drained of color. Oh, Sarah, she whispered, her voice a mix of sadness and disbelief. I didn't go. Along with it is where Sarah rushed to add her words, stumbling out in her urgency to explain. It told him not that I wouldn't be part of any plan, like that's part of why I left suddenly that day. I couldn't bear it being part of his schemes, watching how he treated everyone. Sarah's confessions seemed to unburden her somewhat, but the rest of us were left reeling. It felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger that Bob could even conceive of such a plan, and relief that Sarah had the conscience to reject it. We need to be careful. Azed finally breaking the heavy silence. Bob is desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. Mom nodded, a determined look settling over her features. We will be assured. Her voice is stronger now. We'll handle this together as a family. We spent the rest of the evening discussing our next steps. It was clear that we needed to tighten our security measures and remain vigilant. Sarah's willingness to come clean about Bob's intentions was a grim reminder of the length she might go to the next day. We called Miss Daniels, our lawyer, and updated him on Sarah's revelations. She advised us to document everything and consider additional legal protections. We also contacted the local police to inform them of the potential threat, just to be on the safe side. They promised to keep an extra watch on our property and advised us on further safety measures we could take. Despite the turmoil, there was a silver lining in seeing Sarah fully turn her back on Bob's manipulations. She was making real efforts to mend her ways and rebuild her relationship with Moman. Her confession, while disturbing, had brought us closer, tore down the last of the walls she had built around herself. As days turned into weeks, our home began to feel secure, once more fortified not just by alarms and locks, but by the renewed trust and unity among us. Sarah enrolled in some community college classes, focusing on her future, determined to prove that she was more than Bob's daughter. The days following Sarah's harrowing confession about Bob's intentions felt like a whirlwind. Everything accelerated quickly. Once we decided to involve the authorities more deeply, Sarah, carrying the weight of her knowledge, was determined to see justice served, not just for her own redemption, but for the safety and security Taiafor family, especially Mom. After gathering ourselves and ensuring every detail of Sarah's testimony was meticulously documented, we contacted the local police department. The urgency of the situation was palpable. As we drove to the station, the silence in the car filled with a mix of anxiety and resolve. Sarah was quiet, but her determination was evident. She was ready to face whatever came next at the police station. Sarah took a deep breath and relayed her entire story to the officers. She explained how Bob had planned to manipulate and potentially harm Meta Gay. None restricted access to Mom's finances. The officers listened intently, their expressions a mix of shock and seriousness. They took notes. It was clear that the gravity of her revelations was not lost on them. The police acted swiftly, with Sarah's detailed account and the evidence we had collected over the months. Financial records, Bob's erratic behaviors and threats, the case against them solidified rapidly. They coordinated with our lawyer, Mr. Daniels, who provided additional legal documentation and testimony that corroborated Sarah's claims within days. An arrest warrant was issued for Bob. The police caught him at his residence without incident. He seemed resigned, perhaps finally understanding the severity of his actions and the inevitability of facing consequences. News of his arrest spread quickly in our community, a mix of disbelief and relief palpable among those who knew our family. Bob's subsequent trial was a culmination of all the efforts and truths we had painstakingly gathered. Sarah was called to testify, and despite the high emotions of seeing Bob again, she stood strong. Her voice didn't waver. As she recounted the manipulation and threats, her testimony painting a clear picture of Bob's manipulative nature and malicious intent. The evidence against Bob was overwhelming. Between the financial discrepancies, Sarah's testimony, and additional corroborations from other investigations, the case was ironclad. The courtroom waxed and ceased. The jury returned verdict guilty on multiple counts of fraud, attempted extortion, and endangerment. Bob was sentenced to a substantial term in prison, reflecting the seriousness of his crimes against our family. The judge's words were stern. Address Bob condemning his actions and the betrayal of trust that had endangered the lives and well-being of a family that had once welcomed him. Their relief in the courtroom was palpable as the gavel fell. Mom held him. Ye hand tightly, tears of relief and a bit of sorrow in her eyes. It was over, at least the legal battle. Sarah exhaled deeply, a visible weight lifted from her shoulders. In the days that followed, our family began the slow process of healing. The house felt safer, lighter, as if Bob's presence had been a shadow that was finally gone. Mom started to smile more, her laughter returning in bursts that filled the rooms with warmth. Sarah, now more a sister than ever, was integral to our healing process. Her honesty and bravery had not just helped incarcerate Bob, but had mended bridges. Her family well understood that while the legal proceedings were over, the emotional recovery was just beginning. But there was a newfound strength among us, a unity that Bob's actions had unwittingly forged. As I reflect on these events, writing this chapter in the quiet of the evening, I realized the saga was as much about uncovering deceit as it was about discovering the resilience and depth of our family bonds. We were tested undoubtedly, but not broken. Instead, we merged stronger, closer, and more protective of one another. Bob's imprisonment was a closure, painful chapter, but it was also the beginning of a new one, for use a chapter of rebuilding and moving forward with the past firmly behind us where it belongs. We had learned that together there was no hardship too great, no betrayal too deep that we couldn't overcome as a family. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If my story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share. Stay tuned for more heartfelt and inspiring stories.